Good morning. My name is Tracy Hollins. I'm a member of this congregation and a youth group advisor here, and I welcome you all to the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Binghamton. All are welcome who come in peace, no matter who you are or whom you love. We are a community of covenanted seekers, encouraging each other in the ways of truth and service. We travel our spiritual paths together and draw from many sources for inspiration. As a newcomer, I hope you were offered a yellow packet by a greeter when you came in the door. Please fill out the form clipped to that packet, and we will give you a name tag and a subscription to our newsletter, The Beacon. In our newsletter, you will discover many events and opportunities through which you can connect. So please direct your attention to the announcements in the insert of the order of service. And I have a couple additional announcements. Next week's service will be led by Tim Wolcott, Restorative Justice, The Time is Now. Education and incarceration are supposed to prepare citizens for productive community engagement. Too often authorities resort to punitive actions that undermine that goal. Come learn how resolving conflicts based on mutual respect and shared goals can grow resilient communities. And immediately following today's service, there's going to be an ice cream social in the social hall. It's for $5. You'll be supporting our UUCB community. And this fundraiser is being led by the Tuesday afternoon small group ministry group led by Patty Parsons. This morning we're going to greet our neighbors with the word ashe, right? Did I say that right? Ashe. So ashe is a multi-purpose word, but its simplest translation is power. This morning, since the theme today is community and covenant, I ask that you help empower your neighbors, your community, by passing on the greeting ashe, or power, to remind us all that together we are stronger than we are in isolation. While we do this, we will play a praise song for Ogun, the spirit of iron and the power. It represents including the power of oath and community covenant. So, ashe.
Baba koromoni we
Baba riba cheke cheke
mafogu
Baba riba cheke cheke
mafogu
Baba riba cheke
Baba
cheke
koromoni we
Baba riba cheke cheke
mafogu
Baba riba cheke
Babarere mafogun. Eh, ogun.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Juris, and our opening words today is just a general orientation to voodoo. The music and form of this service are taken from the ancient religious practice of voodoo, my primary practice for the last 20 plus years. Technically, what I do is not orthodox voodoo, but I use that name to indicate all of those things that are dismissed or shadowed in our primary culture because it makes us uncomfortable. Hence terms like voodoo economics, which was a way to demean an illogical, false view of economic theory. The truth is that voodoo, if one agrees with the African origin of Homo sapiens, may be the Ur religion, or their original spiritual practice, the tribal worship of ancestors and the natural forces creating the world. As I was finishing up this service this morning and writing the brief summary of Ashe, the sky burst open, and we had a thunder and lightning storm, and I greeted the Orisha, Shango and Oya Yansa, and the Ashe they represent. I can very easily go on for hours about voodoo and its relationship. It's very much like Unitarian Universalism because it's a syncretic religion, so it has a tendency to absorb everything in its path. But I'm going to just give you a taste of what I've considered worship in my spiritual community for the last 20 years. May the Orisha, Loa, and ancestors be appreciated far and wide. Enjoy. Next is a praise song for Achosi, the spirit of the land and the first people upon it.
Chong 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 kwami, ilia bata chong kwami.
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 Chong 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 baile, ilia bata chong baile.
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 Chong 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 kwami, ilia bata chong kwami.
Chong 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 kwami, ilia bata
Oke
chong kwami.
bata chong 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 kwami, ilia bata chong kwami.
Chong 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 kwami, ilia bata chong kwami.
Yosi chong 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 kwami, ilia bata chong kwami.
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 So if we all may rise in body or spirit, let's read the covenant together. Love is spirit of this congregation, and service is its life. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
We call this light before us in hope that we may always remain a strong community, working together to make the world a better place. When we are grieving or sad, when we are challenged, when we need help, this flame guides us out of the darkness. When we are cheerful, when we celebrate, when we accomplish a great task, when we return to a place that makes us happy, the chalice reminds us to share our happiness with others. Please be seated. Now's the time our service when we share our financial resources. If you are a first or second time visitor, please let the plate pass you by. Your presence is gift enough. During the offertory, we'll be listening to the praise song of Oshun. She is the goddess of love and money. The offertory will now be received.
Ci vuole ure, mima o ciumbai lele, o ciuo, a ci vuole ure,
Prima o ciumbai lele, o ciuo, a ci vuole ure. Prima o ciumbai lele,
o ciuo, a ci vuole ure,
prima o ciumbai lele, o ciuo, a ci vuole ure. Prima o ciumbai lele,
dialo de o ciuo, a ci vuole ure,
prima o ciumbai lele, o ciuo, a ci vuole ure. Prima o ciumbai lele,
dialo de o ciuo, a ci vuole ure.
prima o ciumbai lele, o ciuo, a ci vuole ure. Prima o ciumbai lele,
Dialo de ochuo, a ci vuole ore.
prima o ciumbai lele, o ciuo, a ci vuole ure. Prima o ciumbai lele,
Erelele go, dialo de a ci vuole ore.
prima o ciumbai lele, o ciuo, a ci vuole ure. Prima o ciumbai lele,
Ochuo, a ci vuole ore.
prima o ciumbai lele, o ciuo, a ci vuole ure. Prima o ciumbai
Dialo
lele,
de ochuo, a ci vuole ore.
prima o ciumbai lele, o ciuo, a ci vuole ure. Prima o ciumbai lele,
Dialo de ochuo, a ci vuole ore.
prima o ciumbai lele, o ciuo, a ci vuole ure.
When I first came to Binghamton a little over 2 years ago, I would have doubted your sanity if you told me I'd be regularly attending church, congregation, or social club, as a fellow UU prefers to call it. My spiritual practice for the last 30 years has been experientially based, not revealed. One is a direct experience of the divine, very much like the practice of meditation, as opposed to the revelations from an interpretive higher authority, in the form, at least in Christianity, of a minister or priest. I've always preferred to experience it rather than to be told how and why to experience it. I'm a practicing voodoo priest and have been for over 20 years. To call what I do voodoo is a bit of a misdirection and in no way should be confused with Orthodox Haitian or African voodoo. Rather, it's my own eclectic personal blend derived from 20 years of working with the spirits brought over during the African diaspora. I feel free to call myself atheist-leaning and incorporate elements as apparently disparate as Zen and South American shamanism with contemporary neurological revelations and psychology, a mix that works for me. The centerpiece in the music is meant to provide an emotional feel to how I am used to worshiping. It might be on a Sunday or any other day of the week. There would be fellow voodooists dressed in white and wearing a rainbow of necklaces. There would be crazy props all over the elaborate altars, from railroad spikes to pitchforks and lots of veils and cloths, usually every conceivable color, and rum and cigars and drums for sure. And we would party with, for, and to the African diaspora gods and have direct conversations with the embodiment of divine energy, called in multiple traditions Ashe or power. As I was setting up the centerpiece today, I was wondering if this is the very first time in UUCB history that there's a bottle of rum and a cigar on the centerpiece altar. This is a far cry from my Lutheran upbringing, with all the things Voudanists do in private, like prayer, made the centerpiece of a long, often boring to children and questioning adults Sunday, followed by, as my father would often say, leaving God in the church and being a miserable human being back in the parking lot. It was pretty clear to me which I preferred. So what could UUCB, or the tradition of Unitarian Universalism, offer an anti-disestablishment, atheist-leaning, practicing voodoo priest? I was soon to discover a great deal, and that it contained lessons that for someone who has been traveling through communities of spirit for 30 years, regretted I had not learned earlier, and hope that many more communities take heed of. And I am not talking about forming committees, although that is a foundational practice for any truly democratic body. Examples abound, from an emphasis on character to the centrality of service. These are traits of Unitarian Universalism that many communities, from the pagan revival to many of the guru paths, could learn a great deal from. Not coming from a place of exchange or recruitment, many of my homeless friends would often complain about the mandatory reading from the book before they could get their free lunch. But from a place of this is what people do, or rather, as the Buddhists say when taking the vows, this is how an enlightened person acts. By being these things, we create these things in the world. May they spread far and wide. But my central theme today is that of covenanting, a very powerful tool for community that I've rarely seen practiced outside of this congregation in an authentic way. When I first came to the UUCB community, I was puzzled how Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, secular humanists, Hindus, pagans, atheists, and all the rest could function together, let alone agree on anything. Of course, that brings us back to the committees again. My epiphany came about as I realized that at the most basic level, although we may disagree about the definitions of spirit or religion, the community in Unitarian Universalism has become the spirit or the practice. Everyone is bound by the community. It is a community of spirit, and with the addition of the community covenant, it becomes an intentional community. But before we go there, let's clarify some of my language and how I'm using it. People seem to love the title of my service. But more than one friend pointed out, we are already in the zombie apocalypse, so maybe I could change it to surviving until the end of the zombie apocalypse. But I believed other challenging situations was enough. It should be apparent to everyone we are living in times of accelerating change and that our cultural paradigms are no longer sustainable. Whether it's climate change or economic inequality or the United States' eternal war on anything the state sees as dangerous to itself without regard to the people it's sworn to serve, or the accelerating rate of technological change which promises to help but seems mostly to hinder. We live in unsustainable times, and where this will lead, nobody knows for certain. I've been an avid follower of collapse theory since 2007 and probably had the impulse to poke my head into unpleasant cultural places my entire adult life. And the thing that has struck me is not how it seems to be all happening at once, but rather how glacially the collapse is happening. Which brings us back to zombies and their general popularity. Zombies are a very modern myth. Not the voodoo zombie, which lies at the heart of the myth and has its mythic origins in slavery and the fear that the conditions of slavery would somehow reach beyond death itself. But the slow, unstoppable force that threatens everything you know and which can be survived sometimes, but survival always depends on your community of ragtag humans. Anyone who has been exposed to this multi-tentacled media beast and has teens or young adults has probably realized that it is a myth or a meme which expresses concisely and simply the things which are happening right now in our world. Just as Bambi and Old Yeller made death and youth palatable to a previous generation. In other words, it captures a certain uncomfortable truth about how we, especially our youth, feel about our society and how we can best respond. The second word choice that several people outright objected to was communities of spirit, with an old hippie friend of mine saying, "That's stupid. We already tried chanting Hare Krishna and ringing bells and it did nothing, so we need less spirit and more action." When I explained what I meant, she grudgingly agreed. I regularly get up in the morning and read all the news that's not fit to print in the major media outlets. It can be a bad start to the day. But one day, when I was reading another well-founded screed on the passing of environmental tipping points, and I went outside and listened to birds with a heavy, paranoid heart, I suddenly thought, well, if it's all going to be that much worse, then why not do what I want and do it with the people I want to be with? It was the old Navajo saying, "Today is a good day to die," or the old Zen saying that every breath is about life and death, brought home in a way I could really understand. When I started working with the UU youth, I was thrilled to see what a difference a genuinely open and caring community can make in people's lives. And I thought, I wish I had that when I was growing up, and I did to an extent. But it was all accidental, a matter of time and place and how you adapted the culture of high school. And although for an unredeemable nerd I did very well for myself, there was very little intention behind it. As an example, I had several interlinking circles of friends who somehow I had become the organizer for. When I had my first shamanic opening in college, I realized how little I knew about myself, so how could I presuppose to tell others what to do? When I abandoned that role, many friends abandoned me, and I don't blame them because our community was an adaptive and reactive one. We fell into our roles because of circumstance and ability. When we left those roles intentionally, the entire structure seemed to crumble. The capriciousness of living life simply in response to circumstance, in my opinion, is not very much of life and shares a great deal with zombie motivations. It is hard to live intentionally, to make choices based on principles, except in communities like UUCB. As I said, my insight was this was a place where community takes its place as part of spirit. There is an often ignored in our hyper-individualized society a school of psychology which places the unconscious not in the individual but between people. It's a perspective worth considering, and it's not just a metaphysical speculation. Rather, it is an acknowledgement that the unconscious is created by words, which obscure the things that cannot be said. So in essence, where the unconscious lies is not in us as individuals, but rather that which is between us, hidden by the language you use to discern sense and meaning. We would have a radically different world if these ideas had caught on in the 60s, one more far community-oriented and far less isolationist. I know several of you who object to the word covenant, since traditionally it means a promise to God, and they have very little use for God. But in the context of what I'm trying to talk about, we can borrow from Islam or Buddhism. In Islam, the famous phrase, "God is God," means everything is God, a very scientific view of the universe. And I've wondered if Islam has an easier time with atheists than atheists tend to have it toward Islam. Since if everything is God, that includes atheists and non-believers. The Zen Buddhists, on the other hand, like to say the absolute is the relative and the relative is the absolute, meaning that enlightenment is inseparable from manifestation. In both cases, a covenant would be an agreement between the world as it is, requiring no faith. And as I said earlier, when you put community first in your spiritual practice, very quickly community becomes divine, or at least its isomorphism. This community, unlike so many communities I have moved through, where we are drawn together by chance and interest, this is an intentional community, a covenanted community. Douglas Taylor likes to say covenant equals promise, and while I agree, I see it a little differently. I see it as an expression of intention, very much like the Zen view of Buddhist vows. There is no hellfire or punishment if you break the vows. Rather, there's an accountability to your intention as a member of the deliberate community. In a culture which considers the contract to be more sacrosanct than the human life or suffering, it feels wrong to simply reduce it to a promise, or its business equivalent, a contract. Rather, it seems to me to be a self-adjusting tool, meant to be used again and again to hone intention, a deliberate choosing rather than simply a default to time and place. A wonderful example of what I'm talking about is Ikkyu-yu's poem. And he was a Zen practitioner who was very good at haiku. It's called A Meal of Fresh Octopus. Lots of arms, just like Canaan, the goddess, sacrificed for me, garnished with citron. I revere it so. The taste of the sea, just divine. Sorry, Buddha, this is another precept I just cannot keep. In other words, he's acknowledging the fact that he's broken his covenant or his vows, but he's honing his intention. He's being very honest. There's no heaven, there's no hell, there's no punishment. It's just simply he cannot keep his covenant. So from my view, a community of spirit is an intentional community who have the same interests and commitments, but who have deliberately made a choice to be together. For the last 5 weeks, I've been in California, visiting friends and relatives and being in a television pilot, playing myself as a voodoo priest named Juris. I had an opportunity to talk with many people from my communities of spirit, including my voodoo collective and the healing collective I lived in. Many of these communities consider themselves to be intentional and make promises to one another, but lack a way to keep themselves accountable. I spoke of the strength of small group ministry, which is a way to reinforce the covenant on a smaller, more accessible scale, and how I've seen for myself in the youth community and the young adult community the power of choosing to be together under covenant, and how it acts as a rudder, a steering wheel for how we are together as a community in both good times and challenging times. And I believe some of them listened and may take it back to their collectives and communities of spirit and try to live as a deliberate community rather than as a reactive community, empowering not just themselves but their communities as a whole. In other words, who do you want to be on your zombie apocalypse survival team? Who do you choose to spend your last days with? Because even if nothing manifests, if the economy stabilizes, man-made climate change is a myth, and the sun is only having a short-lived tantrum, we all will pass on eventually. And so every day is one of our last, and instead of giving in, if we begin to deliberately reach out to make covenants with our partners, with our children, and with our communities of spirit, saying, yes, I choose to do this, and why not? So that's the end of my sermon, but let me give you a little orientation of what we're going to do for the rest of the time. First, I'm going to be reading the UUCB Behavioral Covenant. And then we're going to reflect on it for a couple of minutes. I would like everyone in silent reflection to sit with the covenant in silence and think about what it means for you to deliberately choose to be part of this covenant, to be part of this community of spirit. And then feel free to share your thoughts at the ice cream show, social. And then we will be doing a singing of De Chloris, which is in the hymnal. De Chloris can be considered a praise song for Guadalupe, who's up on the altar, and Guadalupe and her Aztec predecessors have been adopted by many voodoo houses. But in terms of covenant and the history of De Chloris, this song was sung by Cesar Chavez and the Migrant Workers' Revolution in California as they walked the thousands of miles to Sacramento to demand change and justice. They were united as a community under the covenant of Guadalupe, because that was the running theme, since most of the migrant workers were Mexican, and Guadalupe is a manifestation of their Catholic faith in Mexico. So that, I figured, was a good orientation to what I'm talking about, community and covenanting and social outreach. So, where is... Okay, this is not the one that's printed in there, so I'm going to read this. This is the UUCB Behavioral Covenant. In our relationship with one another, we covenant to interact with one another directly with respect, honesty, and kindness, to welcome diversity, and to respect the unique gifts each individual brings to our congregation. To ask ourselves before we speak, is what I'm about to say true, kind, and necessary? In our relationship with our congregational community, we covenant to help one another and to let one another know when we would like help, to provide for and to care for our spiritual home. In recognition of our common humanity, we covenant to practice patience, forgiveness, and understanding, to recommit ourselves regularly to our covenant. Rise if you would like.
We're going to sing the first 3 verses in English, and we're singing the last verse in Spanish.
All
extinguish our flame, but not without illuminating truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Adide,
Odidema,
Baba Dide,
Odidema,
Arogolowo, Arogolense,
Dide, Dide, Odidema,
Arogolowo, Arogolense,
Dide, Dide, Odidema,
Baba Dide,
Odidema,
Baba Dide,
Odidema,
Arogolowo, Arogolense,
Dide, Dide, Odidema,
Arogolowo, Arogolense,
Dide, Dide, Odidema,
Iwonko, Iwonko, Iwoloro.
Bongo Iwoloro, Obatala Wolenje, Bongo Iwoloro,
Iwonko, Iwonko, Iwoloro.
Bongo Iwoloro, Obatala Wolenje, Bongo Iwoloro,
Baba, Iwonko, Iwonko, Iwoloro.
Bongo Iwoloro, Obatala Wolenje, Bongo Iwoloro,
Iwonko, Iwonko, Iwoloro.
Bongo Iwoloro, Obatala Wolenje, Bongo Iwoloro,
Iwonko, Iwonko, Iwoloro.
Bongo Iwoloro, Obatala Wolenje, Bongo Iwoloro,
Iwonko, Iwonko, Iwoloro.
Bongo Iwoloro, Obatala Wolenje, Bongo Iwoloro,
Iwonko, Iwonko, Iwoloro.
Bongo Iwoloro, Obatala Wolenje, Bongo Iwoloro.
Obatala baba emi. Oro ye o ma ye ye o. 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 Oro ye o ma si re o. Oro ye o ma ye ye o. Oro ye o ma si re o. Que te vale, 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 que te vale. Oro ye o ma ye ye o. Oro ye o ma si re o. Baba oro ye o ma ye ye o. Oro ye o ma ye ye o. Oro ye o ma ye ye o.
Ochalamo manino wa, ochalamo no. Ochalamo manino wa, ochalamo no. Obo kio 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 mote. Ochalamo manino wa.
Ochalamo manino wa, ochalamo no. Ochalamo manino wa, ochalamo no. Obo kio 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 mote. Ochalamo manino wa,
Ochalamo manino wa, ochalamo no. Ochalamo manino wa, ochalamo no. Obo kio 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 mote. Ochalamo manino wa.
ochalamo manino wa, ochalamo no.
cacara. Awe mi cacara. Awe mi cacara.
Agüero coma tipuleo su caca. Agüero coma tipuleo su caca. Otro agüero coma tipuleo su caca. Agüero coma tipuleo su caca. Agüero coma tipuleo su caca. Otro agüero coma tipuleo su caca. Agüero coma tipuleo su caca. Agüero coma tipuleo su caca. Otro agüero coma tipuleo su caca. Agüero coma tipuleo su caca. Agüero coma tipuleo su caca. Otro agüero coma tipuleo su caca.
Oh, soto, le sufero, le retore, le sufero, le reteru. Arese bombi a die, a un coccolere a bobo e qua.
Ella guaré, ella guaré, ella guaré, ella guaré, ella guaré, o lo sure, o la huelieleco, papá lo sun, lo sun, sabate, papá lo sun.
Oh, soto, le sufero, le reture, le sufero, le reteru. Arese bombi a die, a un coccolere a bobo e qua.
Ella guaré, ella guaré, ella guaré, ella guaré, ella guaré, o lo sure, o la huelieleco, papá lo sun, lo sun, sabate, papá lo sun.
Oh, lo sure, o da huelieleco.
Papá lo sun, sabate, papá lo sun.
Oh, lo sure, o da huelieleco.
Papá lo sun, sabate, papá lo sun.
Oh, lo sure, o da huelieleco.
Papá lo sun, sabate, papá lo sun.
Oh, suku, le sufero, le riture, le sufero, le riteru. Arese bombi a die, a un coccoleri a bobo igua.
Ella guaré, ella guaré, ella guaré, ella guaré, ella guaré, o lo sure, o tu agüeyeleco. Papá lo sun, sabate, papá lo sun.
Baba irimo, kosu sawade.
Papá lo sun, sabate, papá lo sun.
O da weni, o lo sure yeleko.
Papá lo sun, sabate, papá lo sun. Toricateo batala, 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 el ericateo chala, 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 el ericateo batala, el ericateo chala, el ericateo chala, el ericateo chequeche ariu toricate, 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 chequeche ariu toricate. Guaye guaye lo mío, guaye calamefa, guaye guaye lo mío, guaye calamefa, guaye calamefa, aremu guaye calamefa, oh. Guaye guaye lo mío, guaye calamefa, guaye guaye lo mío, guaye calamefa, guaye calamefa, aremu guaye calamefa, oh. Guaye guaye lo mío, guaye calamefa, guaye guaye lo mío, guaye calamefa, guaye calamefa, aremu guaye calamefa, oh. Guaye guaye lo mío, guaye calamefa, guaye
Monitoricha, o batala tola ye o.